Hey y'all, welcome to today's show. Looks like I was able to get this one done after all. After our usual questions and answers from radio replies, we'll get back into Father Sparago's exhaustive catechism of the Catholic Church, and we're going to get into the sixth of the Ten Commandments. And it's actually rather brief. It follows so closely on the heels of the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill. So, if you listened to yesterday's show, this one's going to put a lot into perspective. If you didn't, go listen to yesterday's show. If not, Father Sparago was an amazing catechist in the 1890s when he wrote his book. You certainly will get the full meaning of that. So let's start with the anti-Catholic is questioning the priests. He says, the same Christ said, whoever shall be greatest, let him be the servant of all. And they answer, that is verified in the Pope, whose official title is the servant of the servants of God. Being first, he is the servant of all Catholics. He ministers to our spiritual needs and gives his life to work, renouncing a self-chosen career. But the words you quote do not dispense us from honoring the Pope as Vicar of Christ. Person says there is not much holiness in having an evil woman as Pope. How could she be the victor of Christ? I think, I've heard just about every anti-Catholic argument, but this is one that I've read about. No one has ever accused the Pope of being a woman, as far as I'm concerned. As far as I know, but apparently, that was a rumor that went around somewhere in the early 1900s, late 1800s, who knows. And they answer, some misguided writers have spoken of a female pope named Joan, who was supposed to have reigned from 855 to 857 AD, but never was a greater hoax put over on a credulous public. Voltaire laughed at the gullibility of fools who believed this tale. And Voltaire was certainly no fan of Catholicism. The Encyclopedia Britannica says that she is a pure myth. Chambers' Encyclopedia calls her a fabulous personage. In other words, a fable, not great. We use the word fabulous as if it's wonderful. It actually means like in a fable. Yeah, it's sort of an odd American phrase that could actually be rather confusing sometimes. Gibbons, in his Decline and Fall, exploded the legend half a century ago, saying, a most palpable forgery is the passage about Pope Joan, which has been foisted into some manuscripts. Her advocates bear testimony against themselves, producing echoes of the late 14th, 15th, and 16th century, at least 5 centuries after her supposed death. She has been annihilated by 2 learned Protestants, Blondel and Bale, but others still attempt to save this poor engine of controversy. I love the way people used to talk. Anyway, the person goes on, do all popes and priests go to heaven? And they answer no, not unless they live good lives, or at least die repentant of their sins. They must save their own souls just as others, and can lose their souls if they wish. Person asks, was not Alexander VI one of the most evil men that has ever been seen? And they answer, not quite, although he was certainly a disgrace to his office, but it is just because his office demanded such holiness that his life was so utterly incongruous. Yet, if you reject the papal system because of Alexander, you must logically reject the College of Apostles because of Judas. And remember that the life led by Alexander disgusts Catholics far more than it disgusts Protestants, for Catholics know what is really expected of a pope in accordance with Catholic spiritual principles. Had Alexander lived up to Catholic teaching in its fullness, he would have been a saint, even as many popes are saints. But then, of course, he would never have been mentioned by Protestants. Nice little dig there. A person goes on, many popes died violent deaths, which is ridiculous. They answer, not many, a few, and very few. The assassination of the king would prove neither that he was never the lawful head of a nation, nor that he was an evil man. And we'll wrap it up here with the question, a large proportion of the popes, well, this is more a assertion, we'll go with that. A large proportion of the popes were men of whom any church would be ashamed. And the answer, not a large proportion. History records 6 or 7 having been unworthy of their office. Out of 260 popes, that proportion is about 1 in 40. 1 in 12 is the proportion of evil men among the apostles chosen by Christ himself. But this does not affect the question of their under discussion. But this does not affect the question under discussion. It proves nothing more that certain individuals failed to live up to the obligations of their state of life, and that some bad men were rulers of the church, and they could be quite good rulers from many points of view, even though personally lax. And if you really wanted to get into how many actual bad popes there have been, by my count, it's like 2 or 3, like actual, and really more like 2. But I don't claim to know the details of the lives of every single pope over the last 2,000 years. But you'll get a lot of Protestant propaganda that is just made up, just plain made up. And the thing is, it's so funny. Y'all all know Dr. Taylor Marshall. I mean, he's one of the most popular Catholic podcasters and speakers and writers. Controversial figure, you name it. People love him or hate him. I'm actually quite a fan. He put out something the other day, and someone came back and said, Peter was never in Rome, so he can't be the first pope. And you hear this so many times from Protestants. And he's like, well, here's a citation in the early church writings. Here's a citation in the secular historians of Rome. Here's this. And they're like, no, I don't believe it. I only believe what's in the Bible. For Pete's sake, so to speak, who told these people that the Bible is a comprehensive history book? A lot of stuff happened that was not written down in the Bible. And when St. Peter was martyred under, I believe it was Nero, the books of the Bible had already been written. I mean, how in the world? I mean, you give someone a historical document that's accredited, that's been preserved in museums for, 1,500, 2,000 years. They say, nope, it's not in the Bible. I don't believe it. Okay, great. There's a lot that's not in the Bible. There's actually a whole lot that's not. The Bible never said about, the space shuttle program or nuclear weapons. The Bible doesn't talk about Sputnik. Does that mean it didn't happen? Well, they could say, well, the Bible was written 2,000 years ago. Yeah, well, Sputnik is now almost 100 years ago. Shouldn't the Bible have included it if the only book you're allowed to read is the Bible? I mean, the Bible doesn't mention the Crusades. Again, we're going back about 1,000 years. The Bible doesn't mention the fall of Rome because Rome hadn't fallen when the Bible was written. That's what? Anyway, I'm not even trying to nail down the year, but you know what I'm saying. The Bible doesn't speak of Native Americans. Native Americans existed at the same time the Bible was written. The continent of North and South America, the continents have not been discovered by Europeans yet, and especially, Middle Eastern Europeans who wrote the Bible. You cannot, well, as the saying goes, you can't put sense in a fool's brain. And anyone who says, I only believe what's written in the Bible, is learned in some respects in terms of religion, but ignorant to history. There probably, a few hundred people, a couple hundred people mentioned in the Bible. Does that mean that the other million or so who were in the world at the time didn't exist? I mean, I was going to say, here's a writing by whomever, we'll call him Bob, okay? Bob of Thet or something. Okay, we'll just call him Bob, right? And he wrote a bunch of books. I'm just making this up, right? But let's say I can present to you the writings of Bob in 300 AD. And they've been found in a cave, a salt cave, perfectly sealed, absolutely pristine. Carbon dating says exactly when they come from. And Bob's telling you the history of people who lived in his town. Nothing to do with religion whatsoever. He's just naming everybody who lived on his street and on his block and who their relatives were and what they had for supper. And I give you the writings of Bob, having been proven by every historian and known for 2,000 years, and you say, I don't believe Bob ever existed or his neighbors because they're not mentioned in the Bible. How much sense does that make? Always remember, Jesus left us a church, not a Bible. There was no Bible for almost 400 years of Christianity. What they had was the teachings of the apostle and certain Old Testament scriptures. They had some letters, like the church in Corinth had the letters that St. Paul wrote to the church in Corinth. They didn't have the letters he wrote to Ephesus. Okay, the Bible was compiled, completed, put together in the late 300s, translated into a common language somewhere between 380 to 420 AD. For twice as long as America has been a nation, Christianity had no Bible. So Protestants who say they believe in the Bible alone as the sole authority would have to say for almost 400 years there was no Christianity after Christ. And a church that was not Christian put the Bible together and gave it to them. St. Augustine said, I would not believe the Gospels except that the Catholic Church says that it's true. That really is the only authority we have to even say what's written down in the Bible is the truth. The only witnesses are the ones, the apostles who wrote the books, who taught and gave us the Bible. And, it's mind-boggling sometimes how willfully ignorant and how people can just tie everything in knots rather than accept that Jesus founded a church, and the church is the Catholic Church that gave us the Bible and that continues to teach what's written down and what's in oral tradition from the apostles to this very day. The Bible itself says it doesn't contain all the teachings of Christ. It says that all the books in the world wouldn't, but the apostles could in their minds, and by teaching and talking to their disciples who went on to become, bishops and priests who went on and did the same thing, and that continued. Well, that continues to this day. But anyway, let's go ahead and get to the Sixth Commandment. And like I said, the Sixth Commandment is really an unfolding of one aspect of the Fifth Commandment. That's why it's rather short. In the Sixth Commandment, I'm quoting Father Spirago now. In the Sixth Commandment, God prohibits everything that might stain our purity or that of our neighbor. One cannot enlarge upon the sins against the Sixth Commandment, for the mere mention of what is impure takes the bloom off of our innocence. Hence St. Paul exhorts the Ephesians, all uncleanliness, let it not so much as be named among you as becometh saints. Ephesians 5:3. Nevertheless, Holy Scripture warns the faithful repeatedly and emphatically against these sins, so the church cannot pass by them in silence. For this vice perhaps causes the destruction of more souls than any other. In fact, among the lost souls in hell, few will be found entirely free from it. God especially forbids impure thoughts and desires. Evil thoughts are to be resisted both on account of their sinfulness in themselves and because they lead to immodest actions. They are like a spark which occasions a great conflagration or fire unless it be immediately extinguished. St. Jerome compares unchastity to a snake whose head must be instantly crushed before it can eject deadly poison. Evil thoughts must accordingly be banished at once. This is done most readily by diverting the mind or having recourse to prayer. See what is said about temptation. I guess we'll get to that in a minute. As long as evil thoughts are displeasing to us, they are not sinful. We are only to blame if we take pleasure in them. Okay, well, how many of us are actually not guilty of that? Okay, we all entertain evil thoughts in one shape or form. Um, Evil thoughts are an abomination to the Lord. Proverbs 15:26. One ought to flee from unchaste thoughts as one would flee from an assassin, for they cause the death of the soul. Impure thoughts, if entertained, give rise to impure desires, i.e., the wishing or longing for the sin suggested. That's what St. Clement of Alexandria called delectation. He went on great length in his writings in the 2nd century about how one could be presented with temptation, but that in itself was not a sin. One could resist temptation, which was meritorious, or one could think about it and take pleasure in it, even if one didn't do it, and that was, in fact, sinful, venial, although it may be. And, I'm guilty. Everybody, I'm sure. I'm not going to say everybody is. I mean, obviously not everybody is. I often think it's a great blessing, to certain, Down syndrome and such children, that they're so innocent and pure. They never have to worry about such things. Now, I mean, some of the high-functioning ones do, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. That's the purest soul you ever encounter on earth. Impure thoughts, we said that. I'll just say it again. Impure thoughts, if entertained, give rise to impure desires, the wish or longing for the sin suggested. As the tree springs from the root, so evil actions spring from lust. Lust is the consent of the will, and this is as really sinful as our Lord says, the deed itself. Matthew 5:28. Impure words. Now, this is another tough one. Now, I'm Southern. We don't... How would I put it? Okay, so Yankees, folks from up north, most of the folks I go to church with cuss a lot without even thinking about it. They don't even mean anything by it. It's like part of their culture, right? I mean, like, F this and F that, and you know how it is with folks from New York and New Jersey and Chicago. I mean, Boston. And they really cuss a lot. I'm not sure why, but it seems to be part of their culture. In the South, a man will cuss in two situations. One, if he's really angry. And if he starts cussing, you better run. Because, as I've said many times, I carry a hunting knife and I carry a pistol, and I've got a crowbar right under the seat of my truck, and you better look out if I start cussing. That means push too far. We don't cuss in like normal conversations. We just don't. We're taught as children. The other example, the other exception, which is guys cuss around each other in a lighthearted way, making jokes. Now, usually it's just like, light, what you would call mildly profane words. We just give each other a hard time. Not out of anger, not meaning anything by it, but not in general conversation. And never in front of women. Men in the South, at least the way I was, I'm probably 100 years out of time in modern culture, the way I was raised in, very traditional old family, rural culture. Men never cussed in front of women. It was not done. If you cussed in front of women, somebody else was going to punch you in your mouth. I mean, I'm not kidding. That's the culture of the South. You open doors, you say yes ma'am and yes sir, and if you act like a jerk, somebody's going to beat you down. Okay? That is literally how I was raised, and I still do not cuss in general conversation. It's been really surprising to friends of mine from California, most recent ex-girlfriend. She's like, you never cuss. I'm like, well, you haven't seen me angry. But she's like, to her it's like, second language. Friend from New Jersey was like, really? He couldn't understand it at all. Or, I'm sorry, he was from Chicago, but you get the idea. Actually, in traditional Catholic teaching, we're really not supposed to. use foul language. I'll just put it that way. The problem comes down to the definition of profanity. Now, I'm not talking like, Supreme Court dictate on what's pornography and not pornography. Okay. No, what it comes down to is America is essentially English in its culture. We speak the English language. The English derive essentially from what we would call the Anglo-Saxons, some Celtic influence, and the Normans, the French. The English do not like admitting that they are essentially half French, especially after the rise of Protestantism. So they began turning French words that were common in English language at the time of Shakespeare and considering them to be obscene. I'll give you an example. Close your ears if you're sensitive. PISS, okay? You will look in Shakespeare and you will find it quite frequently. You will find it quite frequently in old medical texts. Of course, it was the word for urination. The English decided it was obscene because it's a French word, pissure, okay? So they decided that anyone who said it was low class, possibly French and not English, and they were to be shunned. Okay, so, and there are other words from German that are considered, cuss words in English language. Not all of what the English would consider to be profanity is in itself profane. It's just not their modern version of Anglo-Saxon, of English language, whatever. English are quite arrogant. But it's the intent of the word that matters. I mean, you take the F word. This is a Catholic podcast. I'm going to try to not, if your kids are listening, I'm trying not to offend anybody. You know what it means. It's initials. For unlawful carnal knowledge. That was an abbreviation in old law books. And it basically means rape. Okay? People now throw it around. They don't mean anything by it. Okay? So if someone who's grown up in Chicago or New Jersey or Brooklyn or whatever, or Boston especially Philadelphia, okay, let me just tell you, Philly. Okay, so if that's just part of their language and they don't mean anything bad by it, it's really difficult for us to kind of judge that in the same vein as Father Spirago would be speaking in 1890 when the word didn't even exist, or the early church fathers in like 200-300 AD. It's the intent. And very usually, the intent is to say something very offensive, vulgar. Vulgar, again, vulgar comes from the Latin word vulgate, which means the language of the common people. So again, it's really kind of hard. But basically, here's like the rule, okay? If what you're saying will be offensive to someone who hears it, it's better that you not say it. That means, in America, bloody doesn't mean anything. It just means bleeding. In England, it's a profanity. It's a profane term. Makes absolutely no sense to me. But if I were in England, I would probably, not that I use it in my common language, but I would probably avoid using that term because it could offend the listener, even if unintentionally. So if you come from the South, from up north, maybe don't walk around talking like My Cousin Vinny. We love the movie. It's a great movie, actually. I just saw a bit of it yesterday. It just happened to be on one of my favorite parts of it. And, Marissa Tomei. Oh, my gosh. What a beautiful woman. Like my ideal of feminine beauty. So, of course, I watched it for a minute. And let me not stray into violating the Sixth Commandment, and I'll try not to think about her too much. No, seriously, she, absolutely my ideal. People who talk like that are very offensive to people in the South. Okay? most white Southerners never use what I have to now to be politically correct call the N-word. A lot of black folk do. A lot of black folk do. So, just it depends where you are. It depends the language you're speaking. Whether you could be speaking Cantonese and you could be cussing in words I've never even heard before. It's the intent behind it. Okay, so now let's get back to what Father Spirago said. Okay, there's also two aspects to this. One, as I said, if it's your culture to use a certain word, like black folk using the N word, or people from New Jersey using the F word, or whatever, they don't find it offensive, and no one who hears it finds it offensive. They don't mean to be using foul language. If your intent is to express anger, displeasure, what would Father Spirago call it? Lasciviousness, then you got an issue. And that's really kind of how you measure it. What is your intent? If, somebody like Tony Fauci pops into my mind and I start to call him an SOB, I actually mean he's a despicable person. And I will try to catch my tongue and not call him that, but that's actually how I truly think about him. And I think he deserves such a title. But then again, that's the story against his mother. Maybe she was a very nice person. Maybe I should figure out something else to call him, right? Okay, so this is the examination of conscience that a Catholic should do. I shouldn't call him a bastard. I shouldn't call him an SOB. But there are a lot of things I probably shouldn't say about him. But I can say I describe him in the worst possible terms. But when I do that, am I being uncharitable? I don't know his motivation. But like it says, I can check the fruit on the vine. And I think he's one of the most despicable people ever to walk the face of the earth. That's my honest opinion. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I'm giving you my honest opinion in the way that's the least offensive. And that's where we're going to go with this, okay? So, impure words. A man whose conversation is unclean has a thoroughly polluted conscience. Unchaste words, so we're really more talking like sexual stuff here now, are a sure sign of unchaste manners, and those who take pleasure in listening to improper conversations are in great danger of falling into sins of unchastity. St. Louis, the great French saint before France fell to the left, the socialists, the godless communists and Democrats and whatever you want to call them, St. Louis on his deathbed exhorted his own son to regulate his conversation, that if all the world heard what he said, he would not have cause to blush for it. The tongue is indeed a little member, and boasteth great things. James 3:5. Many have fallen by the edge of the sword, but not as many who have perished by their own tongue. And I believe that I'm having trouble with this one again, y'all. I'm not sure if it's Ecclesiastes or Sirach. I think this is Sirach, and I'm going to go with 28:22. All right, 3 by impure actions. These acts are differently designated accorded as they are committed by the unmarried. Deuteronomy 22:21, and the married, Leviticus 20:10. Persons related to one another, 1 Corinthians 5:1, or as their sins against nature, Romans 1:6. How do I explain that? Okay, well, there are things a man and woman can do as husband and wife that single people shouldn't do together. But for most of our history, people who were related to each other were encouraged to become man and wife, and now we don't encourage that anymore. And then sins against nature are unnatural acts, homosexuality and such. All right, so 4 by immodest looks. Bold looks are forbidden because they lead to sin. Boy, we don't learn that in our culture, do we? Um, I remember an ex-girlfriend said to me one time, a woman will forgive anything except timidness. In other words, she really liked being, if a guy liked her, she really liked him to let her know. And a lot did, and we didn't have a very long relationship. Bold looks, well, we just said that. Okay, the sin on which the eye looks with pleasure soon takes possession of the heart. Many have perished by the beauty of a woman, and hereby lust is enkindled as a fire. I think this is actually Ecclesiastes 9:9. He who observes no custody of the eyes is like a driver who pays no heed to his horses. He will be carried away and dragged to destruction, or like a fortress of which the gates are not guarded. The enemy soon effects an entrance through them. David would not have so much to bewail if he had kept watch over his eyes. Look not round about thee in the ways of the city. That's, I think, again from Ecclesiastes. His abbreviations for Ecclesiastes and Ecclesiasticus or Sirach are so very close. I'm kind of guessing at it most times. Looking at immodest pictures, going to improper plays, and reading books of an immoral tendency. Now, this is so foreign to our culture, okay? I mean, we are a society just absolutely saturated in pornography. The Catholic Church does forbid pornography, participating in it or viewing it or whatever. Improper plays, movies, or plays, which are sacrilegious, overly sexual, overly violent, etc. But reading books of immoral tendency, yes, the Catholic Church, with its authority given by Christ, has the right and duty to censor books that are bad for Catholics to read. Now we live in an era of censorship and free speech. Well, there is actually something in between, which says in matters of morals and religion, the one church established by Christ does have the right to censor books that would lead to moral decay. Had the French Revolution never taken place, had the various, so-called Enlightenment movements never taken place, the Communist Manifesto would have been banned by the Catholic Church, and no one would have read it, and there would not have been a communist revolution in Russia and China and Cuba and etc. And minimum 200 million lives would have been spared. So, I mean, you want to give me the justification for why censorship is wrong? Well, there is actually one organization on the face of the earth that has the right and duty to censor what is evil. And had it been allowed to do so, around 1900, 200 million lives would have been spared, plus probably 5 times that many killed through abortion, and no Nazis, no concentration camps, etc. No. I mean, 2 world wars. Let's add those deaths. I mean, not just citizens killed by their own governments, but the millions killed in 2 world wars, and then Korea and Vietnam, and yeah. So actually, the Catholic Church has a really legitimate role and duty in that regard. You don't like it? Sorry. Jesus gave his authority to the church, not to you. If you think you know better than the church, you're worshiping yourself and you're actually violating the first commandment. You've made yourself your own God. No, there is a Catholic Church established by Jesus Christ who can say, this book is evil and it should not be read by anyone. And yeah, you remember we just talked about St. Louis, St. Louis the Tenth, is that right? France. He rounded up all immoral books, all books that were opposed to Christianity. He had them burned, and he's a saint and probably the greatest king of France, a hero of the Crusades, and a saint. I mean, just really one of the best people ever lived. It's actually okay to ban, to censor evil so it isn't spread. It spreads like a fire in people's minds. You don't believe me? Um, just, I don't know, go on Twitter or Facebook and just get an idea of how many people are absolutely addicted to pornography these days. You think they care? That a lot of these are children who are being abused and sold into sex slavery and um, really bad stuff happening? No, they're addicted to the images. And that needs to be, an end needs to be put to it. When America becomes Catholic, maybe that will happen. And I do believe America will eventually become Catholic because Protestantism is dying, mainly because of stuff like this: pornography, abortion, divorce, everything that destroys the family. The family is the foundation of the church. You have no families, you have nobody going to your Methodist or your Baptist or your Lutheran or your Presbyterian church or whatever. So anyway, immodest pictures and plays corrupt more surely than impure conversation, because what one sees makes a deeper impression than what one hears. The indiscriminate reading of novels is to be avoided. There are, and did you know the novel, the fictional novel, right, is actually a very new thing. It only started around the mid 1800s. We're talking with Edgar Allan Poe and a few others. I mean, 99% of the books, well, I'll say 90% of the books published in America right now are fictional novels. Before about the mid 1800s, there would be mainly non-fiction books on science and botany and religion and philosophy and history. And yeah, people were a lot smarter. You can definitely go back and look at the schools, their curriculum at the time. People were a lot smarter. But anyway, the indiscriminate reading of novels to be avoided. There are many, and these are the most dangerous of all. Of course, this is for television, which under and the internet, which under a false semblance of propriety kindle the passions and thus do more harm than works of an openly immoral character. Very true. And then we get to immodesty in dress and excessive finery. Those who dress immoderately are the devil's instruments, for they ruin souls. Vanity and love of dress are powerful factors in Satan's service. For a woman who decks their person to attract men dare not presume to say that they are chaste and pure of heart. Their very appearance gives them the lie. Their longing for admiration does not come from a simple heart. It is a snare to entrap others and into vice. It is a bad sign for a woman to be overdressed. Those who make their toilet a paramount, that means their makeup and such, not their toilet, they mean their bathroom, a paramount importance, hold virtue cheap. Let women adorn themselves with modesty and sobriety, not with plaited hair or gold or pearls or costly attire. 1 Timothy 2:9. Now, St. Francis de Sales made a distinction, which I think is important to point out. If one is dressing immodestly merely for attention, that's a venial sin, okay? If one is dressing immodestly to seduce another into an immoral union, we shall say, I'm trying to remember that children may be listening, also a sin, venial as well. If a single woman dresses to attract the attention of a single man in hopes that they'll start dating and get married, that's okay. St. Francis de Sales says that's okay. I absolutely agree with that. I don't think wearing pearls and an earring or a necklace is going to lead anybody into sin. That's kind of ridiculous, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not attracted to jewelry. I've never actually seen a woman who looked prettier because she had jewelry on. That seems to be more like something women enjoy. Okay, just because they like it. Men don't care, don't give a crap about it. Okay. Hey, there's another old English word. Okay, no offense intended. That actually is one of those, that was considered to be a part of the language of the common people that the elites would not speak. But there's no foul intent. I don't care about perfume. Some people do. Not my thing. Doesn't. It usually bothers my allergies. I don't like it. Makeup, I think, can go way too far. But as there's an wonderful old English comedy, British comedy called Last of Summer Wine. One of my favorites, actually. It's very just peaceful and relaxing. But anyway, one of the characters, she never wore makeup, and she always looked very stern and very intense. And her friend said to her that while she shouldn't go overboard with wearing makeup, there's no virtue in looking like you've just recovered from a severe illness. And, adding a little color to the cheeks, a little color to the lips, certainly not going to do any harm to anybody, I don't think. Now, in the 1890s, maybe that was scandalous. I don't know. I can tell you the low-cut dresses and such that were very common in the 17 and 1800s would be considered immodest by many now, like traditional Catholic women and such that like to dress like they're Amish or something. Father Spirago did not condemn that whatsoever. Okay, so I'm going to go with St. Francis de Sales' instruction, and you'll find this in his writings, that a single woman hoping to attract a single man to get married is not violating any precept against virtue by dressing in a way that will get attention. And remember what also Father Spirago said: the woman is made for man, not made for the woman, and the woman is made to delight the man. And if a woman wants to find a husband, getting noticed in a positive way is probably not a bad thing to do. So those that, and there are a lot of, really, really ultra-conservative traditional Catholics who say women shouldn't wear any makeup, women shouldn't fix their hair in anything but a simple braid, women should wear burlap sacks as dresses and walk barefoot all the time. Okay. That's not exactly actual traditional Catholic teaching. The issue there is modesty. And modesty is actually very cultural. If you go to a Hispanic Mass, you will see that the Mexicans and South American folks tend to dress a lot different, with a lot of shiny stuff, as opposed to the folks in America and from our English tradition. So you got to always put all that in perspective. So we're going to wrap this up. Sins against the Sixth Commandment of God are for the most part very grievous in God's sight, and accordingly are severely punished by him. Remember the deluge and the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. The chastisement God inflicts for the sins of unchastity have already been spoken of under the subject of deadly sins. From the place given to the Sixth Commandment in the Decalogue, it may be inferred that transgressions of this precept are on par with murder and theft. Unhappily, many of the plays performed in the theater in the present day represent sins against the Sixth Commandment in an attractive light. And remember, this is 1890. If Father Spirago had been around now to turn on the television or go on the internet, I don't know what he would have done. He wouldn't have been happy. I think he was Czechoslovakian. They tend to be a bit hot-tempered in my experience, the few Czechs I've known. He might have really let people know it. So anyway, y'all, have a good one. And I'll always remember the words of St. Padre Pio. Pray, hope, and don't worry. And I'll talk to you next time.